Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here. Welcome back to Tesla Daily. Today we've got some new information on Tesla's quarterly results from their 10Q quarterly filing with the SEC. We'll talk about those. We've also got some updates on the Model 3 Highland, Cybertruck, and a few other items as well. All right, looking at the stock, Tesla today finishing in the green, so I guess we'll take that after the couple of red days to close the week after earnings last week. Up just 4/100% today, closing at $212.08. The Nasdaq performing up 0.3%. Tesla was outpacing for a little bit there in the day, but couldn't quite last that throughout the day. So hopefully we'll see a stronger week this week. It will depend a little bit on other earnings results, I think. This is a pretty big earnings week, so we'll have to keep an eye on some of those things throughout the rest of this week. All right, looking at the 10Q, in case you haven't accessed these before, you can find these on Tesla's IR page. I would recommend everyone kind of reads through these, but we will go through some of the high-level takeaways and, of course, some of the things that we like to look at with these each quarter. Gives us a little bit more insight on the quarterly results, which is always good to have. First thing that I wanted to take a look at, as I expected some FSD driving revenue, deferred revenue to be recognized this quarter. There was a bit of that, doesn't specify specifically, a little redundant there, but doesn't specifically say that it was FSD deferred revenue. However, Tesla does say that revenue recognized from the deferred revenue balance in the automotive sales revenue bucket was $360 million for the period ending September 30th. So if we look at the last 10Q, kind of the best way to track that, last quarter through June, it was $256 million that had been recognized. So a little bit over $100 million recognized this quarter. Now this can come from other things like Supercharging over-the-air software updates that Tesla will recognize portions of those things, the portions of that revenue, because some of that gets deferred because Tesla has to maintain things through over-the-air software updates, through Supercharging over periods of time. So as that happens, Tesla will recognize some of that, but largely this is from FSD. They do say that Tesla does say that they have about $3.3 billion of deferred revenue sitting in automotive sales. And again, majority of that likely related to FSD. For that number, that was $3.17 billion last quarter, so a little bit of an increase this quarter, but more interestingly, that deferred revenue recognition. And then Tesla does say that they expect to recognize $815 million of this balance, this $3.27 billion. Of that balance, $815 million over the next 12 months. And that is also pretty similar to what they had said last quarter. That was about $750. So increasing what they expect a little bit, but not anything too significant there. Also in the deferred revenue category, so that we were talking about automotive sales there. Pretty interestingly though, in energy and storage, this continues to increase in importance. So Tesla says that they have deferred revenue of $1.05 billion here. And they recognized over the last, let's see, there's a lot of highlighting here, so let me get orientated, but they recognized from deferred revenue balance of the beginning of the year, $511 million so far this year. So let's take a look at those two numbers first. This was $1.1 billion last quarter, so that balance has decreased a little bit, but they had recognized $329 million through Q2. So what they recognized this quarter was actually pretty significant. What is that, $180 million-ish from that balance that was recognized this quarter. And the deferred revenue balance shrunk a little bit by, I think that'd be like $5 million. So still a pretty significant chunk, but a decent portion of revenue recognized this quarter. And then also very interestingly, they say that as of September 30th, total transaction price allocated to performance obligations that were unsatisfied or partially unsatisfied for contracts with an original expected length of more than 1 year was $1.9 billion. Now this line last quarter was significantly smaller, only $800 million here. So basically they're saying that for contracts that are going to be recognized for, more than 1 year out from now, the balance there grew by $1.1 billion this quarter. So pretty significant. They say that over the next 12 months, they're going to recognize $700 million of that versus last quarter, that was just $200 million. So with energy storage, as Tesla has talked about in the past, this is a little bit of the category fluctuates a little bit based off of this deferred revenue and timing of completion of projects. So Tesla may install or deliver a lot of storage. Once it's actually operational though, that's when they recognize the revenue. So when we look at the gigawatt hours installed each quarter, that's something to keep in mind. And that's why I was forecasting for a little bit more volatility than what we ended up seeing quarter over quarter in this line. And part of that is because of things like this where we have this deferred revenue balance. So it'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. I think overall the takeaway from this portion is that a significant increase in deferred revenue here. So I'm going to keep an eye on, and we'll continue to watch that in future quarters. And then always interesting to see what Tesla guides for capital expenditures. We did see that increase to, I think, an all-time high this quarter of about $2.4 billion. The total the total capital expenditures so far this year have been about $6.6 billion. So previously, Tesla's guidance was for $7 to $9 billion in capital expenditures this year, and then in the following 2 years. Now they've updated that in this 10Q to exceed $9 billion this year, but then revert back to $7 to $9 billion in the following 2 fiscal years, in line with the previous guidance. So not too surprising, given that if you just repeated what they did here in Q3 and Q4, they would exceed that $9 billion threshold. So it looks like that's kind of what they're guiding for. I wouldn't expect it to materially exceed that, probably by $100 million or $200 million if we continue to see a little bit of an increase in that quarter over quarter, especially as Cybertruck deploys. But with this, I wouldn't expect anything super major. And then, as Elon said on the conference call, they're not going completely full throttle and still maintaining that guidance for now of $7 to $9 billion for the next 2 years. Obviously, that could change. Elon has talked about how that's somewhat difficult to forecast for, but we have seen Tesla pretty consistently meet guidance on that capital expenditures line. So interesting to see that. The next one here, we had talked about the capital that Tesla had raised in terms of the cash flow this quarter. So that increased in part from financing activities. A little bit more information on this, not a whole lot, but they say that in the third quarter, they issued $2.5 billion in aggregate principal amount of automotive asset-backed notes. So exactly what they said in the deck, or I guess the line that they indicated in the deck, that this was going to be from an asset-backed note. So that's basically Tesla pulling up leases that they have on their balance sheet essentially, and essentially selling that or using that as an asset rather to raise this capital, and then that's the asset that's backing the debt that Tesla will pay off over time. So obviously that adds to the cash flow now, and over time Tesla will then pay that back. So nothing too new on that front. One thing that is a little bit new here that got some coverage today or some attention today, Tesla has updated a portion of their 10Q that talks about certain investigations and other matters. So this is always a good area for the media to look into for headlines. So if we just look again for reference to the second quarter 10Q, Tesla had a little bit of an update here. I guess not an update here, but they've got a note in here on that they've received requests from the DOJ for documents related to autopilot and FSD features. In this quarter, that has been updated. So for the last few quarters, we've seen this same sort of a note without any change to the text. This time it's a little bit different though. They specifically note this time that they have received requests for information, including subpoenas from the DOJ. So previously what this means is that the DOJ could be asking Tesla for information. There could be information in there that Tesla doesn't necessarily want to hand over, and then they would make the DOJ get a subpoena for that information, which would now be potentially what has taken place with Tesla adding this note. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything too bad. Obviously it could down the road. We'll have to wait and see. But the update here is that the DOJ is now more formally or seeking a legal, forcing legal function for Tesla to hand over certain information, versus before it would have just been a request from the DOJ. So that's the update. There's also a little bit of language updates here in terms of talks about FSD and autopilot, but then it also talks about requests for information, including subpoenas regarding certain matters associated with personal benefits, related parties, vehicle range, and personnel decisions. So like they had said previously, to our knowledge, no government agency in any ongoing investigation has concluded that any wrongdoing occurred, but something that is obviously worth disclosing here in the 10Q. So hopefully that kind of clarifies if you had seen any updates on this. Again, this isn't anything necessarily new that the DOJ has been looking at, just a little bit new in terms of how they are seeking that information. So obviously something we'll continue to keep an eye on as we have been doing. And then last couple of things, just a quick update on solar. Obviously we didn't see too much of we have continued to see a little bit of a decline, or I guess a pretty significant decline in solar deployed over the last few quarters. So Tesla obviously has talked about that being related to interest rates. If you've been following other solar companies, they've been having some pretty significant challenges too. But Tesla, at least in the 10Q, saying that they are continuing to focus on ramping energy storage products, improving solar roof installation capability and efficiency, and increasing market share of retrofit solar energy systems. So although there wasn't too much of an update in terms of their targets or anything with solar in the earnings deck, Tesla, at least in the 10Q, still saying that this is a focus of theirs, though this line does match what the second quarter 10Q said as well. And then finally, I guess the last two things on the 10Q, I always like to take a look at revenue by region. Obviously in this quarter, there's a little bit of an impact from downtime, both at significantly, it seems like at Texas and at China, although that became a little bit less significant than maybe we expected with the transition to Highland, but obviously that impacted deliveries pretty significantly. So with that context in mind, revenue down 4% quarter over quarter in the United States, down 12% in China, so that was the biggest decline in terms of revenue quarter over quarter, and down 5% in other. So United States, Europe, and other regions probably pretty similar. Total revenue down 6%, and then China underperforming, again probably impacted most significantly by Highland. You can see the year-over-year comparisons there. US, other growing, with other outpacing, and China declining a little bit. So it'll be more interesting next quarter when we have a little bit more full production capacity, presumably, but we'll continue to watch that. And then the last thing from the 10Q, Tesla also included an exhibit that showed their sort of letter of agreement with Zachary Kirkhorn stepping down as CFO. So just wanted to point out that there's really not anything, at least in my opinion, too interesting in this. But as it was a new addition in terms of an exhibit, probably worth at least kind of showing it and saying that there's really not too much information, again, that I found in here that was of note. All right, let's move on from the 10Q. Hopefully not too bad there. But again, I definitely recommend people go through and read those. Once you do a few of them, they become not so bad. All right, so from Brill Energy on X here, we've got an update that Tesla has delivered, some of the first Highland Model 3s. So we're finally seeing that milestone. There's been maybe some reports of this over the last couple of days, but now we're definitely seeing them in full force in Europe. So we've got a report here from Germany. We've got another report here from Germany on a different Highland Model 3. We've got a report from the Netherlands. So it looks like Tesla has kind of started to unleash these vehicles. They've obviously arrived from the ports. So definitely an exciting milestone, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear more about this, more about the Highland as it gets into customers' hands. We'll start to see initial reviews here pretty soon, so exciting to keep an eye out for those. We've also got an update on Giga Nevada from Zangler, who's been following there with drone flyovers. Looks like Tesla's doing a little bit of construction work in the parking lot where the expansion, at least the render of the expansion, has indicated that they would be expanding to. So we don't know for sure if this is anything significant yet, but hopefully some signs of early expansion construction beginning. With this expansion plan, we had heard from Zangler that Tesla had sort of finalized this a couple of weeks back that we talked about. So hopefully that finalization now leading to this step with construction. But again, no necessary indications that that's what this is yet, but hopefully Zangler will continue to keep an eye on that, and we'll do the same. And then you may have seen some discussion this weekend on X about EV surveys and people indicating that they didn't have much awareness on EV tax credits, EV prices, and price changes specifically lately. We'd actually talked about this already. I'm not sure why it resurfaced again so much this weekend, but Elon did end up commenting on a thread that had kind of spawned from this from James Stevenson on X, kind of just talking about affordability and desirability. And you can see the Venn diagram here that there's maybe not full overlap in terms of awareness with those things right now. So Elon did reply to this saying, "I said that we would advertise. We are doing so at a small scale and will do so at a larger scale as we figure out what works best." So we've talked plenty about this. I don't want to spend a ton of time on it today. But as we had mentioned previously, it kind of makes sense for Tesla to start small, expand that over time as they, figure out what works best, as Elon is saying here. So I'm not surprised to see that. I kind of assumed that was the case, but I think it's good for him to clarify that for people that maybe thought that, what Tesla is doing right now is all that they're ever going to do. Now, we still have to see them eventually expand this, so we'll wait for that, but it does make sense as a plan to just kind of start small. This is not a core competency of Tesla, of course, because they have not done this historically very much, so they're going to have to build some skills there over time. All right, next up, this one's also actually kind of a little bit old, but Teslarati today pointing out, I think this was from April actually, the IIHS, which does safety testing among other things, has published reports on vehicle theft claims. So what's interesting here is that, and perhaps unsurprisingly, Tesla is performing really well in terms of low vehicle theft rates. In fact, of the top 20 models, Tesla has the top 2 with the Model 3 and the Model Y, and they have 5 in the top 20 in terms of relative claim frequency of theft claims. So I calculated the percentage rate here. If these, you can see the total number of vehicles that they're looking at for 2020 to 2022 model years. You can see the number of claims. Tesla is 0.002%, looks like frequency rate in terms of claims. Obviously, whole vehicle theft, not super common. But among the most stolen vehicles, there are, interestingly, the Dodge Charger Hellcat is sitting at, I think it was I'd have to calculate the rate again, but I think it was a 2.5% rate here. Someone can double check that. So pretty high. That one was a little bit of an outlier. Some of these other ones were sitting, I think, around 0.08%. So a significantly higher multiple versus a Tesla. Obviously, Tesla's tech features, Sentry mode, GPS tracking capability should be pretty significant deterrents for things like this. And glad to see that coming through in the data. That should significantly, maybe not significantly, but it should have an impact on things like insurance rates, and obviously just it's a nice car ownership experience when you don't have your car stolen. So good to see some of that data. And then we do have a couple new sightings of the Cybertruck, as we tend to see on most days now. This one was at the Hollister Hills Recreational Vehicle Area Park. So this was spotted by Stretch the CJ2L on Instagram. You can go check out, there's a couple more images here, but just Tesla doing some testing of hill climbing and things like that, which we have seen before, but looks like that is continuing to happen. And then Elon did bring the Cybertruck to the F1 race in Austin over the weekend. So we can actually see a little bit of a video here from the inside of the Cybertruck that was shared on Instagram by Ty Haney. It's pretty short, but gets us a little bit of a glimpse of what the interior looks like. You can see a little bit on the screen there too. Try to pause that in the right spot, but Elon's got the cameras up here. This is the rear camera, so not the front camera like we have potentially seen before. So maybe not quite as interesting. You can see some of the apps on the side, which we had noticed before as well, but always nice to get a little bit more insight on the Cybertruck, and thankfully we don't have to wait too much longer until that delivery event. All right, and then the last few things here on Warbeck on X, noticing that Texas has now started their $2,500 rebate program for electric vehicles. Unfortunately, so you can see the program opening date here of today. Unfortunately, this is going to be limited to 2,000 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or other electric drive vehicles, plug-in or plug-in hybrid, under this grant program. So it's only a $5 million grant in total, pretty insignificant, though potentially some of our listeners here may be able to get in on that. I'm not sure why they would do $2,500 and then limit it to $2,000. It seems like that would go further if they would do like something like a $1,000 credit and give that to 5,000 cars, but nevertheless, I would expect that to be, drained pretty quickly. So hopefully they'll increase that, but for now that is the limit, so just 2,000. And then we do have some interesting looks at the V4 supercharging internals from Christoph2206 on X. Spotted one of these that didn't have the cover on and got some nice photos. Doesn't mean a whole lot to me, but for the electrical engineers out there, probably very interesting to look at these. You got quite a few of them pretty up close. So again, if you are curious about that, you can find that on X. And then one thing I didn't cover on Friday that I meant to cover and it kind of dropped off my note list on accident. Sorry about that. But Tesla had announced that until the end of the year, the S, X, and Y will be eligible to transfer free unlimited supercharging to. So very similar to what we saw with Tesla's transfer of FSD allowance. This is now sort of a nice incentive here for the end of the year for buyers in that situation where maybe having free unlimited supercharging on their vehicle was one big item keeping them from upgrading. Now that gate is a little bit removed. So, we'll see if Tesla extends this beyond the end of the year, but so far we haven't heard anything about that sort of one-time FSD transfer, so probably a good thing to take advantage of while it is an option. And then outside of Tesla-specific news, Samuel Garcia of Neuvo Leon, as we have talked about many times, he has announced that he is going to be seeking a temporary leave of absence for his governor position to run for president of Mexico. So obviously that'd be pretty interesting. He's quite young at 35 years old and has been pretty seemingly heavily involved in Tesla's factory plans with Giga Mexico. He was actually at the Investor Day when Tesla announced this. So interesting to see. I don't know how that really affects Tesla, but presumably they've got a pretty strong relationship. So could be beneficial long term if he were to be successful in that campaign. Not something that I follow, so I'm not sure what his odds would be. And then lastly, the UAW has expanded their strike on Stellantis today. 6,800 new members at their Sterling Heights assembly plant where they make the Ram 1500. So just like the Kentucky truck plant, they are now hitting one of Stellantis's presumably most profitable factories as well. I think they kind of had this planned out beforehand. They seem to be very methodical in terms of how this is unfolding strategically. So I'm not too surprised at this, and I wouldn't also be surprised if we see something, similar escalation for GM in, the next couple of weeks. But keep an eye on that. Obviously, significant impact for Stellantis at this time. All right, that'll wrap it up for today. So as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also find me on X at Tesla Podcast. And we'll see you tomorrow for the Tuesday, October 24th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.